The story of my life isn't one I would have written for myself, but I've come to embrace its twists and turns. There were moments I felt completely lost, as if the world had exposed away every bit of stability I had ever known. These weren't just hardships. They were seismic shifts that shaped who I became. Each time I was on the verge of giving up, someone stepped in, sometimes just in time, to guide me back towards solid ground. But before those rescues came the chaos. My earliest years were a blur of instability, colored by my mother's struggles and my grandmother's fleeting care. When my grandmother passed, I was thrown into a situation far worse than I could have anticipated. Those years in foster care were a series of trials, some I'd rather forget and others that forged a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. By the time I met the people who would ultimately save me, I had already lived lifetimes of hardship. I've been pulled from the depths of life's chaos 3 times. The first 2 times, Gunny Hopkins and his wife, Mrs. Hopkins, were the ones who stepped in to keep me from completely losing my way. The 3rd time was different, though, and this rescue could last a lifetime. I'm David Dare, though most people call me Davy. I spent 12 years in foster care and never met my father. Honestly, I'm not sure my mother even knew who he was. If she did, she never told me or my grandmother. For the first 6 years of my life, my mother struggled with substance misuse, disappearing for days at a time. When she was gone, my grandmother took care of me until her death just before I started 1st grade. After she passed, I went back to my mother, but that didn't last long. Less than 2 months later, I came home from school to find my mother unconscious in bed, a needle still in her arm. I tried waking her up, but I knew from experience that sometimes she just needed rest. So I waited. I ended up waiting for 3 days, surviving on whatever I could scrounge from the fridge and a box of cereal I had to climb up to reach. After missing 3 days of school and still not being able to reach my mother, Mrs. Gallagher, my 1st grade teacher, came by to check on me with her husband, who worked as a gas station attendant. When they knocked, I hesitated to let them in until Mrs. Gallagher assured me everything would be okay. I told her, "Mom's just sleeping," I explained. Mrs. Gallagher went to check on my mom, and after a short time she called for her husband. He confirmed that my mother had passed. They called Children and Youth Services, and I was placed into foster care. Years later, Naomi Schaefer Riley published a book titled How Not to Treat a Child, which critiques the foster care system. The one point I disagree with is that she doesn't emphasize enough how damaging the system can be to the children caught in it. CYS made some half-hearted attempts to find any relatives who might take me in, but I didn't know of any. This was long before genetic testing or online ancestry services became widespread, so I spent a lot of time going through my mother's belongings, hoping to find a name or some kind of contact information. CYS found nothing, and I ended up in long-term foster care, which was deeply flawed. By the time I turned 14, I had lived with 12 different families and attended 9 schools. I wasn't a troublemaker or rebellious, but many of the families I lived with were almost as dysfunctional as my own. Some took me in just for the financial aid they received. I saw bullying, misuse, and neglect in many forms. The worst cases were in homes with both adopted and biological children. There, a clear hierarchy existed, with the biological children always getting the better treatment. Those years of my life were full of turmoil, and I was close to a complete breakdown when Gunny and Mrs. Hopkins stepped in. I first met Gunny Hopkins in gym class when I was in 1st grade. He was an African-American retired Marine sergeant who had started a second career as a high school PE teacher. At the time, he was probably about 40. I'll never forget meeting him. He was about 6'3" tall and weighed almost 240 pounds. If there was any fat on him, it was hard to find. He terrified all the boys at school, especially since, after hours, he ran a dojo in a shopping center near the school. Several people I knew trained with him and said he had martial arts trophies on the walls, even though he didn't compete anymore. No one dared mess with him. Mrs. Hopkins was the school psychologist and was in charge of helping new students. She was about 5'2" and maybe 110 pounds, but she could control Gunny any way she wanted. Later, I found out that they had 3 children, 2 sons who were Marine officers, and a daughter in college studying early childhood education. I also learned that no matter how tough Gunny was, he couldn't handle Mrs. Hopkins when she was upset. When she got wound up, she became a force to be reckoned with. It was also around this time I learned that Gunny and Mrs. Hopkins had become foster parents after taking in a niece whose parents were obsessed and had lost custody. They successfully raised her, and she went on to marry a Marine sergeant and have 2 children of her own. I entered my last foster home a few weeks before starting high school. This family wasn't ideal. The father was an alcoholic, quick-tempered, and always on edge. 2 adopted children had just left, and they depended on the monthly foster care income to get by. With the alcohol, the short fuse, and the financial strain, I expected trouble. And it came about 2 weeks after I started high school. Because of my history with unstable foster families, I was far behind academically. On my first high school exam, I scored like a 5th grader in reading and a 4th grader in math. This meant I would meet Mrs. Hopkins soon after. The meeting was meant to create an individualized learning plan to bring me up to grade level, but it ended up being far more complicated than I expected. The morning of my meeting with Mrs. Hopkins, my adoptive father lost his temper with me. He couldn't find his wallet and accused me of taking it. When I couldn't produce it, he beat me, leaving bruises from my shoulders to my waist, a broken lower lip, and a black eye. I somehow managed to escape and went to school, thinking the day would be normal. I either forgot about the meeting with Mrs. Hopkins or wasn't aware of it. When the teacher told me to go to the office instead of my first class, I walked down the hall and entered her office. The next 30 minutes changed my life forever. By then, I'd gone through enough new student orientations to predict exactly how the conversation would go. As a foster child at a new school, I was used to brief interviews and quick labeling as hopeless. I didn't expect Mrs. Hopkins to actually care about me. I sat down in the chair, turning it slightly to hide the side of my face where my adoptive father had hit me. She began the conversation by asking me to look at her. "What happened to you?" she gasped. I knew how important it was to hide the truth about an adoptive family's problems, so I said, "I fell." "That's nonsense," she replied. "These injuries aren't from a fall. Don't lie to me. If you don't tell me who did this, I'll call the police." I hesitated. She stared at me, then picked up the phone and dialed 911, preparing to make the call. My adoptive father thought I stole his wallet. He was drunk and lost his temper, I finally blurted out. "Did he hit you anywhere else?" "He hit me on the back. It hurts a lot." "Get up and turn around." I followed her instructions. "Pick up your shirt." I lifted my t-shirt to my shoulders. "Good God, how often does he do this to you?" "This is the first time," I said. "I've only been there a couple of weeks." "Sit down," she ordered. "I need to make some calls." To my surprise, her first call wasn't to the director, the police, or CYS. She called her husband, George. "You need to come to my office right now," she said. That was my first hint of how much influence she had over Gunny Hopkins. He showed up just moments later. She explained what she had seen and then asked, "What are we going to do about it?" Gunny wasn't a fool. He knew his wife well and could tell she had a plan. "What do you want?" he asked, already understanding what was coming next. "This child needs a new foster family today," she said firmly. "We're qualified, and we have 3 bedrooms available. If you don't mind, I'll call CYS and ask them to move him today." Gunny nodded silently and stood behind me as Mrs. Hopkins called CYS. The conversation was intense. I had never seen someone so small exude so much power. Mrs. Hopkins didn't ask the CYS employees what should be done. She told them what had to be done, and she demanded they act immediately. I had never witnessed such prompt action from CYS before, and I couldn't believe it was happening. But to my amazement, it was. When the call ended, she turned to her husband and said, "We need to take the boys' clothes and belongings from that house. We'll go after school." She looked at me and said, "Meet me here after your last class. We'll get your things." Then turning back to her husband, she added, "George, take one of your cop buddies from the dojo with you. We'll need him to make sure everything goes smoothly." I glanced at Gunny and couldn't imagine my new adoptive father causing any trouble. But he remained silent, not wanting to jeopardize what Mrs. Hopkins was arranging. I told myself, if she pulls this off, my life will change for the better. Don't mess it up by saying anything. Mrs. Hopkins sent me back to class, telling me we'd meet later to go over my education plan. The rest of the day went as usual. A few people commented on my facial injuries, but otherwise, it was a regular school day. When the final bell rang, I went to my locker, grabbed my things, and headed to Mrs. Hopkins' office, just as she'd instructed. Gunny and a big cop from the dojo were already there waiting for me. The move went off without a hitch. The intimidation of having 2 strong men with me was enough to keep my adoptive father from objecting. I packed up my things, which were few, and loaded them into Gunny's car. He drove me to his house, helped me unload, and set me up in an empty bedroom. I didn't know it then, but the next 4 years would completely transform my life. Living with Gunny and Mrs. Hopkins was radically different from any other foster home I'd been in. They were the first people who truly cared for me since my grandmother. From day one, they made it clear I was expected to be organized, work hard, and stay disciplined. Mrs. Hopkins spent her evenings helping me get my grades up. By the time I turned 18, I was taking college prep courses and doing well. I never had the highest GPA, but I could hold my own in every class. A's and B's were the standard, and anything lower meant extra study hours. Gunny put me through a tough physical training program. Every morning, he had me up at 5:30 for a 5-mile run. He also created a demanding martial arts routine for me, mixing in strength and flexibility exercises. By the time I graduated high school, I was 5'8", weighed 160 pounds, and was in the best shape of anyone I knew, except for Gunny, of course. Shortly before graduation, I turned 18, which meant I was officially out of the foster care system. I worked part-time at a martial arts studio, teaching elementary school kids. After the graduation party, Gunny H. pulled me aside and asked, "What are your plans for the future?" I answered, "I want to become a Marine." He asked if I was sure, considering the intensity of the fighting in the Middle East at the time. I told him I was certain. Gunny and Mrs. H. took me to the Marine Corps recruiter's office, and I signed up. I had just a month left before heading to Parris Island for boot camp. During that month, Gunny pushed me through an even more intense training program than I had already endured, making sure I wouldn't embarrass him in front of his fellow drill instructors at Parris Island. I would never have said it to the instructors, but after 4 years of living with the Hopkins and training with Gunny, Parris Island almost felt like a break. I graduated with honors and carried the company flag during the graduation parade. Gunny and Mrs. H. were watching from the podium, and by then, I considered them my parents. I was proud to show them how well they had raised me. When I enlisted, I planned to make a career in the Marines, but the enemies had other ideas with their RPGs. My first tour was nearing its end, and I had been promoted to sergeant. I was a security squad leader responsible for protecting our battalion commander during a meeting with a local village chief about a water purification project. On the way back to base, the convoy was ambushed. My squad was in the lead vehicle, with the battalion commander and his staff in the middle, and another squad covering the rear. Enemies must have been watching because they hit the middle car with an RPG, not mine. It immediately caught fire. I jumped out, set up a perimeter, and ordered my squad to return fire. While the battle raged, I ran to the burning vehicle and started pulling out the wounded. The first person I reached was the battalion commander. I pulled out 2 of his men and was about to go back for another when the fuel tanks exploded. The blast threw me into a low wall, knocking me unconscious, breaking several ribs and shattering both bones in my lower right leg. When I came to, I was on an ambulance plane to a hospital in Germany. After my leg healed, the Marines awarded me the Navy Cross, a Purple Heart, and a set of plates and pins to hold my leg together. They gave me a medical discharge with a 40% disability rating and paid for my return to my home, Gunny and Mrs. H's house. Back home, Mrs. H asked what I planned to do with my life. I was 22, trained as a marksman, able to teach martial arts, but I had no real skills for the job market. To her surprise, I told her I wanted to go to college and become a high school history teacher. Gunny had made me put a large portion of my pay into a college fund, so between that, the GI Bill, and a disability pension, college was within reach. An hour's drive from the Hopkins house was a good state college with a strong history program and a solid education department. Mrs. H helped me apply. Since I was 22 and had lived on my own for 4 years, I rented a small apartment 15 minutes from campus. Instead of living in a dorm with a bunch of younger students, I decided to double major in history and education, skipping the required freshman courses. One of these was a biology class with a weekly 3-hour lab. Since I didn't live in a dorm, wasn't involved in Greek life, and didn't play sports, I didn't know anyone in the biology class. The teacher told us to pair up with lab partners. Since I wasn't a typical 18-year-old student, no one was interested in partnering with me. When the teacher asked who didn't have a partner, only one hand went up. It was a woman sitting a few rows ahead of me. The teacher told us to team up, exchange contact info, and leave class. I walked down the aisle, introduced myself, and said, "Hello, I'm Davy Dare." She just stared at me, so I continued. "If we're going to be lab partners, we need to exchange information. I'll give you my name and number if you give me yours." She just kept staring. "Miss, we need to do this," I said. "Please, I don't bite, and I promise not to tell anyone." Finally, she spoke. "My name is Vera McDonald. My phone number is..." And she gave me her email. I did the same, then said, "I'll see you in the lab," and headed to my next class. Vera turned out to be a strange person. She had the thickest walls around her I'd ever seen. Trying to get to know her was like chiseling granite with a plastic spoon. We spent almost the entire semester together, and she never revealed a single thing about herself. Despite spending 3 hours a week together in the lab, I couldn't break through her walls, and eventually, I gave up. Then, just before Thanksgiving break, I was talking to a guy in the nearby lab when Vera walked in on us. He asked, "What are you doing over the break?" "I'll be mostly in my apartment preparing for next semester," I said. "Maybe I'll go to my foster parents for Thanksgiving. They live about an hour away, and I haven't seen them since school started." Vera paused suddenly when I mentioned my adoptive parents. She turned to me and asked, "Are you also adopted?" In that moment, everything clicked. I knew how tough foster care had been for me, and I was lucky to have ended up with the Hopkins family. I had seen firsthand how difficult it could be for girls in the system, especially those who were attractive. Vera did her best to hide it with the loose clothes she wore, but I could tell she was a pretty girl. If it weren't for the walls she'd built around herself, I would have already asked her out. Since this was the first time I'd seen even the smallest crack in her armor, I tread carefully. I was in foster care from the age of 6 to 18. I moved through 13 foster homes, and I spent the last 4 years in one. I consider Gunny and Mrs. Hopkins my parents, even though they never formally adopted me. Vera looked at me thoughtfully and said, "I ended up in foster care when I was 2. My dad disappeared and my mom died of cancer. I had no relatives who could take me in. It wasn't an easy experience. I bounced around from home to home. I was lucky to get out of the system without ending up in jail. I had teachers who helped me and a good social worker. They helped me get a scholarship, and now I'm here studying accounting. I'm planning to find a job that offers as much financial security as I can get with this degree. Accountants are always in demand, so I shouldn't have trouble finding work." "Sounds like a good plan," I said. "I'm focusing on history and education. Gunny H is a teacher, and Mrs. H is a guidance counselor. They pulled me out of a bad foster home and helped me turn my life around. After high school, I joined the Marines for 4 years. So now, I'm just starting college as a freshman." We kept talking as we finished our lab work. When we were done, I asked, "Do you want to grab something to eat? I'm starving. My budget doesn't really allow me to eat anywhere except the cafeteria." "All right, on me," I said. "No pressure. Let me treat you. Like one foster kid to another. I've got the funds, and you can pay me back when you're able." With that, Vera became more than just a lab partner to me. I spent the rest of the semester trying to get her to open up. We didn't go on dates, but we became study buddies, spending a lot of time in the library together. I had learned to cook from Mrs. H, so I invited Vera over for dinner at least twice a week. We attended some college sports events together, and I even took her out for a nice dinner one night. Throughout all this, I never touched her, except when helping her with her coat. Due to the Hopkins schedule, I didn't have much time for dating. In high school, I had a few short flings with people in the Marines, but nothing serious. As a result, I didn't really have much in the way of relationship skills. It was clear that Vera didn't either. Though she'd opened up a bit, there was still a barrier between us that kept me from really getting to know her. I saw that she was driven by the need to feel secure, financially, physically, and emotionally. She wasn't about to let anyone in who might threaten that security. Getting her to the point where we could have a real relationship wasn't easy, but because I understood where she was coming from, I kept trying. Over time, I realized I was falling in love with her. As strange as it might sound, the Christmas holidays changed everything for us, shifting us from friends to something more. The college shut down for 3 weeks, starting the week before Christmas and ending after New Year's. I hadn't even considered what Vera would do for the holidays until she showed up at my door with a trash bag full of her things. "Davy," she said, "can I stay with you over the holidays? The dorm's closing tonight and I can't afford a hotel." I felt like an idiot. I should have offered to let her stay with me. "Of course," I replied. "I'll put clean sheets on the bed. You can sleep there. I'll take the couch. I've done that plenty of times when I've fallen asleep in front of the TV. I'll get you towels and a washcloth, but I won't kick you out of your own bed. We can share it. I trust you won't take advantage of me. After all, we're both adopted kids. We've probably shared a bed with other people before." Vera was right, though it had been a long time since I shared a bed with anyone other than someone who was easy to get with. And none of those girls had been around for almost a year, ever since I recovered from my injuries and started college. But if she was ready, then I was too. Who knows, I thought. Maybe we can be more than just friends. I helped her bring her things into my room, cleared out space in the closet and a drawer for her clothes, and invited her into my world. The first night was a bit awkward. I was used to sprawling out on the bed, but that didn't work with Vera there. I didn't have pajamas and usually slept in boxers and a t-shirt, but that felt a little too casual. so I threw on some sweatpants over my boxers before going to bed. Vera seemed to trust me as she emerged from the bathroom in a t-shirt and small shorts, with no underwear beneath. I could feel my excitement rising before she even lay down next to me. I tried to be respectful. I moved to the edge of the bed, facing away from her, but somehow by morning I had turned around, spooning her with my arms wrapped around her, my hand resting on her chest. When I woke up, I was clearly aroused, and Vera noticed. She'd been awake for a while. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to be inappropriate." Vera laughed. "It's fine. I actually enjoy the closeness. I don't think I've ever just cuddled with someone before. I could get used to this." She rolled over, wrapped her arms around me, and kissed me, breath and all. I wasn't ready for it, but I didn't pull away. Without asking, she sat up, removed her t-shirt and threw it aside, then climbed back on top of me, kissing me again, more intensely this time. I was tempted, but at the last moment I pulled away. "Vera, you don't have to do this," I said. "I'm your friend, and I don't want you to feel like you're paying me back for letting you stay here. I'm not going to do this unless we're both on the same page about a serious relationship. I care about you too much to just let it be a fling." From my time in foster care, I knew how easy it was for kids to see sex as just a transaction, something to get what you want or say thank you. But being with Gunny and Mrs. H had shown me what real love looked like. I wanted that with Vera, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less. I could tell that no one had ever refused Vera before, and I had no idea how long she'd been in intimate relationships. But I was probably the only real friend she had at college. She'd let me in because we shared the experience of being adopted. Vera studied me for a long moment before speaking. "Davy, sometimes you're too nice. I'm offering you this, and you're turning it down. Are you serious? It's not easy for me to do this, but I really like you. I might even be in love with you. I fantasize about being with you. But unless you feel the same, it's not happening. If I told you I was in love with you, would that change things?" "Only if I believe you're being honest, not just trying to make me feel good," I replied. "You're impossible," she said, getting out of bed and putting her t-shirt back on before heading to the bathroom. The rest of the day was a little awkward between us. That night, instead of a t-shirt and shorts, Vera wore a tracksuit to bed. There was still nothing underneath, but I sensed she was trying to communicate something. The next morning, I went for a run and called Mrs. H afterward. "Hi, Mrs. H, are we still on for Christmas dinner?" "Of course, Davy. Why would you ask?" "Well, I know it's last minute, but would it be okay if I brought someone else? My biology partner, Vera, is a foster child and has nowhere to go for the holidays. She'll be staying with me because the dorms are closed, and I didn't want her to be alone." "The more, the merrier. Bring her along. We'll make sure she has a great time." "Thank you, Mrs. H. Is there anything we can bring?" "Just yourselves. See you then." Later, I picked up pizza and stopped at a jewelry store on the way home. I bought Vera a small necklace with a tiny pendant. Since she would be joining the Hopkins family for Christmas, I wanted her to have a gift to open. I didn't realize at the time, but that necklace would be the first Christmas gift Vera ever received that wasn't from a foster care agency or charity. It was that gift that shifted our relationship from friendship to something more. When I gave it to her, she opened it and immediately burst into tears. Then, in front of everyone, she jumped onto my lap and kissed me like she'd never kissed me before. Later that night, she pulled me into the bedroom and told me she wanted us to be in a real relationship. It took me a year and a half to fully understand our relationship, but for Vera, I'm not sure. We quickly learned that good closeness comes from connection, not just physical desire. Vera never went back to the dorm. When it reopened, we moved all her things into my apartment and started living together. Gunny and Mrs. H had some concerns about how fast things moved, but they accepted Vera into the family and supported us. The next 3.5 years went by fast. Vera excelled in her accounting program, graduated at the top of her class, and landed a job with a top firm in Philadelphia. I found a teaching position at a suburban high school, and we got married in a small ceremony with Gunny and Mrs. H as our attendants. At the reception, Gunny handed me a card with a check for all the support payments they had received for me, which we used to buy a small house near the SEPTA rail line so Vera could commute easily. Despite her long work hours and travel, we were incredibly happy. Vera was finally settled, confident in her career and our relationship. About 4.5 years into our marriage, Vera's firm was hired by the U.S. government to audit a defense contractor accused of massive billing fraud. Vera's team worked on the project for weeks, traveling to the Midwest to investigate. Before each trip, she gave me a passionate night of lovemaking, and the same when she returned. We kept in touch constantly, and although it wasn't perfect, Vera loved working on such an important case. It could fast-track her career. The whistleblower, Richard Wilson, was an accountant who discovered fraudulent billing by a fake subcontractor, eventually tracing it to a corporation owned by defense contractor executives. After reporting the fraud, Richard filed a lawsuit, and things got heated. Vera spent time with Richard on each trip, reviewing the bills and payments. If the fraud was proven, Richard stood to gain a huge payout. At the time, I didn't know that Richard had developed an interest in Vera, and when she saw the potential financial security his investigation could offer, she started thinking about a future with him. Richard made many enemies with his investigation. After 3 failed attempts on his life, the feds placed him in protective custody. He agreed to it, but only on the condition that Vera join him in the witness protection program. It wasn't until years later that I learned Vera's true reasons for agreeing to leave with Richard. It wasn't just the money, but the safety and protection offered by the U.S. Marshals. Her childhood in foster care had left her insecure, and she saw this as an opportunity to escape the life we had together. The morning Vera disappeared started like any other. The night before, we had an intense, passionate night of lovemaking, perhaps more fervent than usual, since we had discussed starting a family, and she had stopped taking birth control pills. I thought it was just her trying to get pregnant before the trip. She left for work the next morning, and that was the last time I saw or heard from her. Later, security footage showed her leaving her office, as if heading to the airport and getting into a black SUV with temporary plates. When I didn't hear from her for days, I grew worried. Calls went unanswered, emails unopened, and texts went ignored. Something felt wrong. I called Vera's office to find out what happened, and they told me she was on vacation. That didn't make sense. She'd been heading to the Midwest for work. I asked if they'd heard from her, but they hadn't. In a panic, I reported her missing, and at first the police weren't sure there was cause for concern. They asked about any arguments or lovers, suggesting she might have lost her phone or been too busy to check in. When it became clear that her phone was off, her laptop was untraceable, and her cards weren't being used, the police started taking it more seriously. They reviewed surveillance footage showing her leaving the office and getting into a black SUV with fake plates. Soon, they were conducting a full investigation. After hours of questioning and a search of our home, they found no clues. It was as if Vera had vanished. I never believed Vera would leave me, especially since she had shown me love in her own way. The only thing she took was a necklace I gave her for Christmas, something she never took off. As the days passed with no news, I turned to drinking to cope with the pain. I took a leave of absence from work and spent the summer lost in my grief. By July, I hadn't spoken to the Hopkinses in weeks, and Mrs. H grew concerned. She sent Gunny H to check on me. When he arrived, I was drunk and passed out on the couch. Gunny was furious, something I had never seen before. He dragged me to the shower and called Mrs. H for help. She agreed to take me in, and Gunny brought me to their house. He insisted that I pull myself together and promised to help me get back on track. The next morning, he woke me at 5:30 a.m. and pushed me through a grueling workout that left me exhausted but sober. That set the tone for the summer. By the time school started, I was in better shape and my head was clearer. Mrs. H arranged for counseling, and by Christmas I had regained some stability, though the emptiness from Vera's disappearance never fully left. Under Pennsylvania law, I couldn't declare Vera dead until she'd been missing for 7 years. Luckily, her careful financial planning meant I was financially stable, though I couldn't access her retirement funds or sell our house without her. I managed, working part-time as a trainer in addition to teaching, but the hole she left behind never healed. One warm June day, over 5 years after Vera disappeared, I answered the doorbell to find 2 people in business attire, one holding an accordion folder. They introduced themselves as Deputy U.S. Marshal Simpson and Wallach. When they asked if I was Davy Dare, Vera's husband, my heart sank. Had they finally found her, or worse, her remains? I invited them in, and they started explaining something I couldn't grasp. Wallach spoke first. "Mr. Dare, we owe you a huge apology. 5 years ago, the Marshal Service made a mistake. We're here to make it right." Confused, I listened as she continued. 5 years ago, we put Richard Wilson, the informant in the case your wife was working on, into the witness protection program. He exposed a massive defense fraud. Vera was part of the audit team. Apparently, she and Wilson started a relationship, and he convinced her to join the program with him. Before she left, she made arrangements to ensure everything was taken care of. Your divorce, the transfer of all assets, and a letter to you. All of this was meant to be delivered once they were safely settled. Anger hit me hard. You're telling me my wife ran off with some guy she met during an audit? And you knew about this and didn't report it? I've been mourning her for 5 years, and you've been sitting on this. I can't believe this." Wallach looked remorseful. "We're deeply sorry. This folder was supposed to reach you long ago. We only found it when we revisited our records after Mr. Wilson and your wife were liquidated." "Liquidated?" I echoed, stunned. "Yes, they were living in Portland when Mr. Wilson was eliminated in a home invasion. Your wife was seriously injured and fell into a coma. She survived for 35 days after his death before passing. Their second child, a son, and your daughter were unharmed and are in our care." I was in shock. "What do you mean, daughter? We never had children." "Yes, you did. Vera was pregnant when she entered witness protection. Your daughter is around 4.5, and there's a son, too. Vera had a DNA test done after your daughter was born, and it confirmed that the child is yours. She left instructions for you to be their guardian if anything happened to her and Richard. She even set up a trust for the kids, worth over $100 million with you as the trustee." I was reeling. "How do you know all this?" "Vera trusted you completely. She had enough faith in your relationship to make you the children's guardian. She also left you her $5 million estate, including a necklace she wore constantly. She wanted you to give it to Violet as a wedding gift when she marries. The weight of everything hit me all at once. There's something else you need to know. Although we relocated Richard and Vera with new identities as husband and wife, your marriage wasn't legally dissolved because you never filed for divorce or declared her dead. Legally, you're still her husband. At least, you were until she passed a few days ago. This means we can hand Violet over to you right away. But there's more regarding Samuel. We're creating a new birth certificate for him. Once we get it, we can transfer both children to you without you having to go through the entire adoption process. We'll replace Mr. Wilson's name on the birth certificates with yours and complete the transfer. What do you think?" "What do you want me to say? Are you kidding me? Excuse my language. You show up at my door unannounced and tell me my missing wife spent 5 years with some guy under a false identity and has just died? That I have a daughter I've never met who also has a half-brother? That these kids are incredibly wealthy and you want me to take custody? Do you hear yourselves? Some people in this room are out of their minds, and I don't think one of them is me. As embarrassing as it is to admit, it's all true. We'd like to set up an appointment to officially release the children to you and connect you with a probate law firm. We ask that you keep this quiet until everything is finalized. We know we made huge mistakes, and we're deeply embarrassed. Heads will roll for this, but right now the priority is the children. So, are you in or not? As far as we can tell, Vera and Richard had no other relatives. If you don't take them, they'll end up in foster care." It was a low blow. I suspected both marshals knew I'd been adopted and were playing that card. Do what we ask, or 2 young children would be placed in a system I hated. Once they played that card, I had no choice. "I agree. When can I meet the children?" The marshals left a folder with documents Vera had asked them to prepare when she disappeared. I put it on my office table, figuring it could sit there for a few more days. It had already been 5 years. After the meeting, I called Hopkins. Without going into details, I told them that federal law enforcement had contacted me, that Vera was dead, and that she had 2 children I now had to raise. I'll pass the details on to Funny and Mrs. H. They didn't question my sanity. They just jumped into action, helping me plan for my new role as a single dad. 2 days later, at a federal courthouse in Philadelphia, Violet and Samuel were officially handed over to me with new birth certificates naming me as their father. Now, I was their father. Completely unprepared, confused, sad, and angry, but still a father. Samuel, being younger, warmed up to me quickly. It took Violet a few more weeks, but by the time school started in the fall, both were calling me Dad. I enrolled them in a daycare near school that most teachers used. Hopkins pulled strings to find me a pediatrician, reliable babysitters, and other resources for a new dad. I think they saw Violet and Samuel as more grandchildren and me as a son, if not officially adopted. The folder sat on my desk for a month before I finally opened it. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I opened it. Inside were the documents the marshals had mentioned: Vera's engagement and wedding rings, 10 copies of her death certificate, and the necklace I had given her that first Christmas together. After Vera's death, the marshals had retrieved her personal belongings from the hospital and included them in the packet they gave me. I stared at the envelope containing Vera's last letter for a long time before opening it. I wasn't sure I wanted to know her final thoughts, but eventually I opened it and began to read. "Dear Davy, by the time you read this, I'll already be gone. I'm sorry for doing this to you, but I tried to make my disappearance as simple as possible. Enclosed are all the documents you need to erase me from your life and move on. I know this will hurt you, and for that, I can only offer my deepest regrets. You loved me unconditionally, and I'll always cherish that. I wish I could love you the same, but I know myself well enough to admit I've never truly loved anyone. I don't think I even have the capacity for it. After all those years in foster care, I know no one ever truly loved me until I met you. Maybe with the exception of my mother, though I remember nothing of her. You are much stronger than I am because you survived the system and still had the ability to love, but not me. Maybe it's because Gunny and Mrs. H were there for you. Or maybe it's because you're the best man I've ever known. By leaving with Richard, I've gained physical and financial security that we could never have had together. As a former foster child, I'm sure you'll understand. We'll be protected and have money beyond anything you and I could have built. I don't like Richard, and I think he knows it. But he loves me and believes that over time, I can learn to love him, especially if we have children together as we plan. So Davy, be angry. Hate me if you must. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope, when you reflect on your own painful experience in foster care, you'll understand why I made this choice. Please cut me out of your life and move on. Forget me. If you need to mourn, I'll understand, but if not, I get it. There's a woman out there who can love you the way you loved me, and I hope you find her. I hope she gives you a full life, a home full of children and grandchildren. I couldn't give you that. Farewell, my dear Davy. Be healthy, live long, and may it be fulfilling. After reading the letter, I sat at the table for a long time, quietly crying. The paradox was overwhelming. Vera had run away to what she thought would be safety, only for a random act of violence to take her life. My tears weren't just from loss. They were for the fact that a broken system had ruined the woman I loved, a woman whose childhood had exposed her of the ability to truly love anyone. Her death meant that she would never experience that kind of love. I put the letter in the safe and went to bed. I'll never understand why anyone would choose to be a single parent. The good news was that by the time Violet and Samuel came into my life, they no longer woke up every 2 hours. But by the end of the day, I was still exhausted after teaching all day and caring for them at night. Eventually, I used the money Vera had left me to hire a full-time housekeeper nanny, Maria, a lovely 50-year-old Mexican immigrant who immediately began teaching the kids Spanish and showering them with affection, almost like a grandmother. By the time the kids had lived with me for a year, we had become a family. The summer after the Marshalls' visit, I took them and Maria to Ocean City, New Jersey for 2 weeks. It gave Maria a break while the kids played at the beach. We all had a great time and were sad when the vacation ended. When Vera and I bought the house, my closest neighbors were over 70. Early that summer, they told me they were moving to Texas to be near their daughter and grandchildren. Their house sold quickly, and the deal closed while we were away. I hadn't yet met the new neighbors when Violet came in from the backyard with a request. "Dad, can Teddy play in our playtown?" "Who's Teddy?" "New boy next door." "Did his mom or dad say he could come over?" "I didn't see them." "Okay, let's go ask. It's a good chance to meet the new neighbors." So we went next door. I rang the doorbell, and after a short wait, an attractive 30-year-old brunette answered, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a matching t-shirt. "How can I help you?" she asked. "Hi, I'm David from next door. We just got back from the shore. Violet is my daughter, and I have a son, Samuel. They were playing outside, and your son wanted to join them. I just wanted to check with you first." "Hi, I'm Carol Schick. We moved here a week ago. You caught me in the middle of painting Teddy's room. Are you sure it's okay for him to play with your kids?" "Of course, no problem. We'll keep him entertained while you get your painting done. Let me give you my number, and you can call me whenever you want him to come home, or just shout from the backyard." She thanked me and went inside to tell Teddy he could join Violet and Samuel. The kids hit it off like they'd known each other forever. Carol must have lost track of time, because by dinner I still hadn't heard from her. Violet and Samuel wanted Teddy to eat with us, so I went next door again. Carol answered the door, looking even more paint-splattered than before. "Hi again," she said. "I was going to feed my kids, and they want Teddy to join us for dinner. If that's okay, I'll feed them all, and you're welcome to join us too. Can you give me 20 minutes? I'll take a quick shower and change out of these paint-covered clothes." 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and Carol appeared in clean jeans and a man's shirt, sleeves rolled up, holding a bottle of red wine. "Come on in," I said. "We're having spaghetti and meatballs. I hope that's okay. I made a salad to go with it, and garlic bread's in the oven." "This is amazing," Carol said. "Teddy loves spaghetti, though we might have to hose him down afterward. I love pasta, too." "Is your husband here?" I asked. I didn't feel like explaining Vera's entire story to a woman I had just met, so I simply said, "I'm a widower. My wife passed away a little over a year ago." "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "I know how much it hurts." My husband was a helicopter pilot in Middle East. He was liquidated in action about 2 years ago. "I'm sorry," I said. "I spent 2 tours in the Middle East as a Marine and lost several friends there. Losing someone you love is always painful, but it felt different now that I knew Carol was also a widow. She was attractive, maybe a year or 2 younger than me, with an appealing face and a nice body. She had a few extra pounds, but they were mostly around her hips and chest, giving her an hourglass figure I found very attractive. Carol and I ended up talking for nearly 2 hours. After the kids ate, we washed dishes together, then sat around the kitchen table with a glass of wine, getting to know each other better. Carol works as a librarian and moved here to be closer to her parents, which allowed Teddy to spend more time with his grandparents, who could also help out with childcare. I told Carol that I grew up in foster care and returned to this area after my time in the Marines and finishing college because Vera had been offered a great position at a top accounting firm. I followed her since it was easier for me to find a teaching job here than for her to find a similar opportunity elsewhere. Plus, my last adoptive parents, who I consider my real parents, live nearby. The kids were starting to get tired, so we decided to wrap things up for the day. I told Carol about Maria and mentioned that I would be happy to help care for Teddy if she ever needed someone for a short time. My teaching schedule gives me the summers off, and during the school year, I usually get home by 4 p.m., with Maria here from 7 in the morning until I return. Carol seemed pleased with the offer, especially since she worked one evening a week until 8 p.m. After a while, everything settled down. Carol and Teddy went home, and I bathed the kids, read them stories, and kissed Violet and Samuel goodnight. There was definitely a spark between me and Carol, but I was still processing the loss of Vera. I wasn't ready for a new relationship, especially given how my marriage to Vera ended. But it had been 5 years since I had been with a woman, and as the conversation with Carol continued, I started noticing signs of interest from her, though she didn't seem to show any on her end. Still, the loss of her husband was much more recent than Vera's disappearance, so I decided to wait and see what happened. Over the next few months, Carol's family and mine started blending together. Teddy became a regular in our backyard, and Violet's best friend in kindergarten. I stopped by a few times to help with minor repairs around Carol's house. We had dinner with the kids at least once a week, and on weekends we spent hours together, enjoying a glass of wine and watching the children play. It was nearly Christmas when I finally gathered the courage to ask her out. I hoped I wasn't misreading the signals I thought she was giving me. We began spending more time together, driving to the kids' school events and just hanging out. I didn't want to rush things from friendship to something more, but I also knew that if I didn't ask, I might miss the chance, and someone else could step in and steal her affection. So one day, after walking Teddy home, I mustered the courage to ring her doorbell. Carol had just come back from the library and was still in her business casual outfit. She had that sexy librarian look, professional attire, a blouse unbuttoned just enough to show some cleavage, her hair pulled back into a tight bun, and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. My heart skipped a beat, but fortunately, the jeans I was wearing were tight enough to hide my reaction. "Hi, how's it going? Was Teddy good today?" I asked. "He was great as usual," she replied. "He and Violet did their homework, and then all 3 of the kids spent the rest of the time outside." "I actually came by because I wanted to ask you something," I said. "If I can find a babysitter or have Maria watch the kids on Saturday night, would you be interested in going out for dinner and a movie? Just the 2 of us. An adults-only night?" Carol laughed. "Well, it's about time. I was starting to wonder if you were ever going to ask me out. I was going to give you until the holidays, and if you didn't make a move, I was going to invite you myself. Of course, I'd love to go on a date with you. We've been dancing around this for months now. What time should I be ready on Saturday?" "Let me sort things out with the sitter, and I'll get back to you," I said. I wished her good night and nearly floated back across the lawn to my house. Maria was happy to work overtime, especially since she'd been pushing me to start dating again. She had met Carol and liked her, and accepted Teddy as her grandson. After confirming the babysitting arrangements, I told Carol I'd pick her up at 6 on Saturday. We'll go to this great Italian place I've been to a lot, then catch a new movie at the AMC. When I knocked on her door that Saturday, I was nervous, like a schoolboy on his first date. Carol opened the door, and I froze. She was wearing a white blouse, almost sheer, that showed off a lace bra supporting her beautiful bosoms. The pants she wore hugged her hips perfectly, and when she turned around, they accentuated her shapely figure. "Wow," was all I could say. She took my hand and we walked to the car. I opened the door for her and watched her slide in before closing it and walking around to the driver's side. Finally, I regained my composure and said, "Oh my God, if I'd known you looked this good, I wouldn't have waited so long. You look absolutely stunning." Carol chuckled. "You've been checking out my bump for months. Don't think I didn't notice. And by the way, you look pretty good yourself. Looks like your running and martial arts are paying off." The evening passed quickly. As we sat in the cinema, Carol took my hand and rested her head on my shoulder. I leaned down and kissed her, and she responded warmly. Luckily, we were sitting far enough back that we didn't attract attention. After the movie, we went to a local bar with live jazz and spent an hour enjoying the music and talking. When we left, we walked to the car with our arms around each other. I felt the evening had gone well, and I was sure Carol did too. Since she asked when we could do it again, I promised we'd plan another night soon. This marked the beginning of the third saving grace in my life, one that brought me the unconditional love that Vera could never give. We were careful around the kids, but when they were busy outside or asleep, Carol and I acted like two teenagers. We didn't sleep together right away, but we spent a lot of time together. After 2 months of this, I arranged for Maria to watch all 3 kids so Carol and I could get away for the weekend. We booked a romantic hotel in Lancaster County and left right after school. That Friday, we dined at a wonderful French restaurant in Lancaster, then headed to the guest house. When we entered the room, Carol disappeared with a small bag and came out wearing lingerie, garter belt, stockings, lace teddy, and high heels. I was stunned, and well, little Davy stood at attention. We spent the night making love, and though we'd both had a break, neither of us seemed to have forgotten how to please the other. Carol was loud, and I was sure the neighbors must have heard everything. At one point, I thought someone might call the cops. We finally fell asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, we made sure to put the "Do Not Disturb" sign up, giving us time to enjoy each other before checking out. From that point on, we were officially a couple. I introduced Carol and Teddy to the Hopkinses, who gave their approval, as did Carol's parents. We spent every free moment together, and after discussing our relationship with the kids, we started spending nights together. By Memorial Day, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with Carol. After speaking with Carol's father and getting his blessing, I proposed to her at the restaurant where we had our first date. Her yes was so loud it turned heads around the room. Neither of us wanted a big wedding, so we decided on an outdoor ceremony at a local park, followed by a reception at a pavilion with food. The guest list included our families, the Hopkinses, our kids, Maria, and a few close friends. Maria agreed to watch the kids while we honeymooned in the Caribbean. Before the wedding, I told Carol the whole story about Vera, the trust for Violet and Samuel, and the necklace I gave Vera that first Christmas. We discussed adopting each other's children and agreed we wanted at least one more child of our own. Soon after our honeymoon, Carol found out she was pregnant. One of her medications had affected her birth control pills, and she worried I'd be upset, but I was thrilled. 9 months later, baby George David was born, followed by Margaret Ann 2 years after. We decided to stop there. Carol took a leave of absence to raise the children while I continued teaching. With 5 kids now, we realized we needed more space, so we bought a large Victorian house with a big yard just outside the city center. We renovated it, selling both of our old homes to finance the project. We moved in shortly after we learned we were expecting Margaret. Soon after, I discovered that Vera had left me one final gift. The gift was incredible. I hired a lawyer to draft adoption petitions, wills, and powers of attorney for Carol and me, in preparation for distributing the inheritance. I told him I wanted Teddy to inherit nearly everything, as Violet and Samuel were already well taken care of through Vera's trust. He asked for a copy of the trust to reference it properly in our wills, explaining why our assets weren't split equally among the children. After reviewing the document for a few days, he called me. "Davy, did you actually read the trust?" he asked. "No, I haven't," I replied. "The bank manages all of Vera's money. I don't need to access the trust funds for Violet and Samuel, and I won't until they go to college." "Why?" "Well," he said, "I found something in the trust that might affect your estate plans. Vera included a clause that adds beneficiaries if you end up raising Violet and Samuel. It says any children born to or adopted by you or stepchildren under 18 when you married their mother will be added as beneficiaries. So Teddy will remain your stepson after the adoption, and any children you have with Carol will also benefit." She really thought this through, he added. She took care of your kids, even after her passing. I was stunned. The woman who had told me she couldn't love me the way I deserved and urged me to move on without her had ensured that the children I raised would be cared for. She made sure they would never know the insecurity she herself had experienced as a child. I was deeply moved by how much she cared for my children, even from beyond the grave. Carol and I updated our estate plans, and thanks to Vera's generosity, our 5 children will always be provided for. Now I'm sitting on the porch, watching our older kids play in the yard. Carol is nestled in my lap, resting her head on my shoulder. Margaret sleeps peacefully in her carrier. As I reflect on my life, I realize how lucky I am. I'm grateful to the Hopkinses for helping me twice when I was at my lowest, to my beautiful wife for rescuing me from single parenthood, and to Vera for her generosity toward our children. I still can't fully forgive her, but I understand her actions. She was shaped by a broken system, yet in the end, she made one final gesture that, if not love, was at least a recognition of my love for her. May she rest in peace.